The first time I wore the dress, I locked the fitting room door, looked at myself in the mirror, and forgot my own name for 3 whole seconds. Not because I looked ridiculous. Not because I looked perfect either. It was worse than both. I looked possible. And if you have ever spent your whole life pretending some part of you is only a joke, only a costume, only a strange private thought you will outgrow, then you know exactly why that kind of possibility can terrify you more than failure ever could. I was supposed to walk out of that room, onto a set full of cameras, crew, actors, lights, and strangers, and play a role I had never imagined taking. What I did not know then was that the role would not just change the movie. It would drag the truth out of me, one heartbeat at a time, and by the end of that night, the one person I would no longer be able to fool was myself. A week before that, I was just another struggling actor living in a tiny apartment with rent due, a dying phone battery, and exactly $11 in my wallet. My career was not even hanging by a thread. Threads were expensive. My career was hanging by unpaid optimism, voice notes from casting assistants saying maybe next time, and one framed headshot I had started to hate because the guy in it still looked hopeful. I had taken every role I could get. Waiter with one line. Brother number 2. Dead body in a crime show. Even a shampoo ad where my only job was to look surprised by foam. So when my agent called and said, "I found you something unusual, but the money is real," I laughed before she finished the sentence. I thought unusual meant dark, complicated, maybe villainous. I thought it meant a challenge. I had no idea it meant silk, eyeliner, high heels, and the most honest performance of my life. She told me a streaming drama had lost an actress right before shooting. The character was essential. Reshoots would be expensive. The director wanted someone with emotional range, someone who could carry vulnerability without making it look weak. Then she paused in that dangerous way agents pause when they know their next sentence will decide everything. The role, she said, is a crossdressing role. Not comedy. Not parody. Serious drama. They need someone fast. If you say yes, you audition tomorrow. If you say no, I move on. I almost said no on instinct, the way people swat away any truth that arrives before they are ready. But then she said the number. I sat up. I asked her to repeat it.
She did.
My rent, my bills, my mother's medication, the loan I had been dodging for 3 months, all of it suddenly gathered into one impossible sentence. I said yes before courage had time to argue with fear. That night, I did not sleep. I told myself I was nervous about the acting. That was the clean explanation, the professional one. But if I am being honest, the script was not what kept me awake. It was the quiet curiosity I had spent years kicking into the basement of my mind. I had always noticed fabrics the way other men noticed engines. I knew the difference between a stiff hem and a graceful fall. I knew how a soft sleeve changed the mood of a person. I knew why certain shoes made a room sound important. I had known these things without ever admitting how much I noticed them. When I was younger, I called it observation, then taste, then actor research. Anything but what it really was, a fascination I did not know where to place. So that night, with the audition script glowing on my phone, I realized I was not only afraid of failing, I was afraid of succeeding too well. The audition was held in an old studio with cracked white walls and a lobby full of people pretending not to judge each other. I expected to find 5 or 6 other actors there. Instead, the waiting room was almost empty. One guy left as I arrived, looking relieved, like he had escaped something. Another sat in the corner reading the script with the same expression people wear in hospitals. I signed in and opened the sides. The character's name was Elena. She was not written as a gimmick. She was not there to be laughed at or exposed. She was a person surviving in a rigid world by performing grace better than the people born into it. Every line felt unexpectedly human, careful, tender. I hated how much that calmed me. When they called my name, I walked in telling myself I was there for the paycheck. Then the director looked up, watched me for 3 seconds, and said, "Don't show me a man trying to look like a woman. Show me a person trying to protect something fragile." That sentence went through me like a key. I read the scene once, then again. Then he asked me to stand, cross the room, sit, pour tea from an empty cup, and say the lines as if my life depended on no one noticing my fear. I did it badly the first time. My hands were stiff. My shoulders were wrong. I looked like I was negotiating with my own body. He stopped me, came closer, softened his voice. Slower, he said. Let the fabric arrive before you do. Let your hands finish thoughts your mouth hasn't spoken yet. I stared at him because no one had ever directed me like that. He was not teaching me femininity as performance. He was teaching presence, stillness, intention. I tried again. This time I imagined every movement had a cost, every glance had risk, every breath might expose me. When I finished, the room stayed quiet. The director leaned back, folded his arms, and said, "There you are." I did not know whether to feel proud or exposed. An hour later, I got the role. I should tell you I celebrated. I should tell you I called my friends, ordered good food, played music, stood on my balcony, and thanked fate. I did none of that. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the contract email for nearly 20 minutes. Then I laughed once, very quietly, because it finally hit me that I had won the part one never thought I would even consider reading for. And deep underneath the fear, underneath the practical relief, underneath the panic about fittings and rehearsal and public reaction, there was something else I could not name yet. Not excitement, exactly. Not shame. Something sharper. Like the moment before stepping into cold water, when your body knows the shock is coming but also suspects it might wake you up. The first fitting happened 2 days later, and that is where my life began splitting into before and after. The costume department was on the second floor of the studio, warm from steamers and irons, crowded with garment bags, pins, shoes, jewelry trays, wigs on stands, and the kind of organized chaos only experts can create. I expected awkwardness. I expected smirks. Instead, everyone acted like I was there to do a job, which somehow made it more intense. A woman named Mara introduced herself as head costume designer and took one look at me before saying, "If you keep standing like you're apologizing to the room, nothing will fit the way it should." That was my welcome. Not "Are you comfortable?" Not "Don't worry." Just truth. She measured my shoulders, waist, inseam, hands, neck. Then she held up a soft wine-colored dress and said, "This one will either terrify you or save you. Sometimes it does both." I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. When I changed into the base layers first, I realized how wrong I had been about everything. I had imagined the transformation started with the outer look, the dress, the wig, the makeup. But the first real lesson was structure. The invisible things. How posture changes when you change what your body is supported by. How movement changes when clothing asks different questions of you. Mara explained everything like a scientist and an artist at once. Never fight the garment, she said. If you treat it like an enemy, you move like a hostage. If you let it teach you, it will tell you where grace lives. She adjusted the waist, fixed the fall of the skirt, pinned the shoulder, stepped back, then told me to walk. I took 2 steps and nearly tripped over my own self-consciousness. She did not laugh. She just said, "Good. Now fail better." For the next hour, she taught me more than some acting coaches had taught me in years. She showed me how smaller steps can look stronger on camera, how turning from the waist before the shoulders changes silhouette, how hands should never flap around uncertainty, how sitting is choreography, how standing still can be more powerful than crossing a room badly. She taught me that confidence in presentation is usually not loud, it is precise. And somewhere between the 3rd correction and the 10th attempt, I stopped feeling like I was being dressed up and started feeling like I was being translated. That terrified me enough to make me ask for a break. Mara studied my face and nodded like she had expected it. "Go look in the mirror now," she said. Not before. Now. So I did. I walked into the fitting room, closed the door, and looked. That was the moment I told you about at the beginning, the moment my name vanished for 3 seconds. Because the person in the mirror was not a joke. Not a disaster. Not some cartoon version of femininity. I was not magically transformed into another human being, and that is exactly why it hits so hard. I was still there. My eyes were still mine. My nervous mouth still mine. The uncertainty, still mine, but framed differently, softened differently, carried differently. I saw not a stranger, but a version of myself I had never allowed to fully exist. I touched the sleeve, then the necklace, then the line of the waist, and I felt ridiculous for how much emotion simple fabric could pull out of me. When I opened the door again, Mara took one look and said, "There. That face. Remember it. The camera."
Will.
The first full rehearsal should have been easier after that. It wasn't. If anything, it was worse because now I knew the role could work. Failure becomes much scarier once possibility enters the room. The set was built like an old-world sitting room, all polished wood, tall windows, teacups, mirrors, and secrets. I arrived early, got dressed, had my hair set under the wig, went through the first layer of makeup, and kept telling myself this was acting, just acting, only acting. Then I stepped out onto the floor in heels for the first blocking rehearsal. All eyes turned, and every technique I had learned evaporated. I took the wrong path around a chair, missed a mark, sat too hard, stood too fast. In the next take, the heel caught the hem, and I stumbled into a side table. Not enough to fall, but enough to hear a couple of people suck in a laugh. My ears burned so hot, I thought the wig pins would melt. I wanted to disappear. Not because I had embarrassed myself as an actor. I had done that before. This was different. It felt like every private fear I had ever had was suddenly standing under studio lights. I braced for ridicule. Instead, the director called a break and the lead actress, Naomi, walked over carrying 2 cups of water. Naomi was the kind of actress people call effortless because they never see the labor beneath the elegance. She handed me 1 cup, looked at my shoes, and said, "You're trying to control them too much." Then she put her own cup down, took 2 slow steps across the floor in her heels, and said, "Don't walk like you're avoiding a mistake. Walk like the room belongs to your secret." That sentence stayed with me. She then showed me how to shift weight, how to pause before sitting, how to turn without telegraphing fear. No judgment. No performance. Just help. It was the first time on that set I felt I was not alone. By the end of that day, I was exhausted in ways I had not expected. Physically, yes. Emotionally, even more. I went home, kicked off my shoes, stood in the kitchen in silence, and tried to become ordinary again. But ordinary did not fit right anymore. That night my mother called. She had been ill for months and hated sounding weak, so our conversations always began with her pretending everything was fine. She asked how work was going. I said it was complicated. She laughed and said complicated usually means important. I almost told her then. I almost said, "Mom, I'm playing a woman. Mom, I wore a dress today. Mom, I looked in the mirror and it scared me because I didn't hate it. But I couldn't yet." So I told her I was learning a difficult role. She said, "Good. Difficult roles pay twice. Once in money and once in truth." I remember staring at the dark apartment after she said that, because somehow mothers always know the road before we admit we are on it. The next turning point came by accident, and it hit harder than rehearsal ever could. After a late fitting, Mara asked me to pick up coffee from the cafe across the street because the assistant had left early. I was half changed, still wearing a long coat over the costume base, minimal makeup still on, wig off but hair styled. I thought no one would care. I told myself I looked vague enough to pass as just another tired person from set. Then at the register, a voice behind me said my name. I turned and saw Daniel, a guy I had gone to acting class with years ago. He looked at me, then at the makeup, then back at me. That half-second felt like standing on a cliff. I was prepared for the grin, the joke, the little cruelty men use when they feel uncomfortable. Instead he smiled, not mockingly, just surprised, and said, "Wow, you look kind of amazing." I laughed too fast and said it was for a role. He nodded and said, "Still, most people can't hold that much attention without collapsing." Then he paid for my coffee and walked out like he had not just cracked open one of my oldest fears. I stood there with the tray in my hands, stunned by how powerful simple neutrality can be. Not approval, not obsession, not ridicule. Just a human reaction without venom. That mattered more than I can explain. Because a lot of fear survives not on actual experience, but on imagined punishment. We rehearse disaster so many times in our minds that we start mistaking it for memory. And when nothing terrible happens, your fear gets confused. It doesn't vanish, but it loses some authority. On the way back to set, I caught my reflection in a shop window and, for the first time, didn't immediately look away. I adjusted my posture instead. That might sound small. It wasn't. For people who have spent years shrinking from their own reflection, choosing not to flinch can feel revolutionary. The production schedule intensified after that. Longer days, more scenes, more complexity. And with complexity came a second layer of understanding. Crossdressing was not only about clothing. It was about timing, detail, listening, and the relationship between inner certainty and outer presentation. Mara kept teaching me tiny things that changed everything. Never overcorrect with the hands. Relax the jaw before you smile. If you're adjusting the wig too often, you're announcing insecurity. If the shoes hurt, shorten your emotional panic, not your stride. Naomi taught me how eye contact can be soft without being weak. The makeup artist, Lena, explained that the face reads emotion differently when contour and shadow change its architecture. Even the sound guy joked that the difference between panic and elegance is often just one controlled breath before you speak. These were practical lessons, but they became emotional ones too. The better I got at the external craft, the less I could deny the internal truth waking up underneath it. Then the leak happened. Every set has one person who thinks private moments are content, and ours was no different. Someone posted a grainy behind-the-scenes clip of me in costume, mid-scene, before the show had even announced casting. By morning, it was everywhere. Half the comments were curiosity. A quarter were confusion. The rest were the usual internet garbage people throw when they see anyone crossing a line they are too frightened to question. Screenshots. Memes. Laughing reactions. Amateur. Critics declaring my career dead before they had seen a frame. My phone turned into a fire alarm. My agent called 3 times. The studio called twice. I sat on the edge of my bed reading strangers explain who I was, what I must secretly want, what I must be ashamed of, what kind of man would do this, what kind of audience would watch it. It is a strange thing to see yourself discussed like a rumor while you are still trying to understand yourself privately.
I nearly quit that day.
Not dramatically. Quietly. That is how people usually abandon things that matter. They don't explode. They slowly decide disappearing would be easier. I drove to the studio with the speech prepared in my head. I'm sorry, this is too much. I'm grateful for the opportunity, I hope you understand. But before I reached the director's office, Mara intercepted me in the hallway, took one look at my face, and walked me straight into wardrobe without asking a question. She closed the door, pulled a chair in front of me, and said, "Read me the worst comment." I did. She nodded. "Read me another." I did. Then another. After 5 of them, she held up her hand and said, "Do you hear the pattern? None of them are about your performance. None of them are about truth. They are about fear, wearing cheap language." Then she leaned in and gave me a lesson I wish more people understood. Never let an audience decide your worth before you decide your intention. If you go online looking for permission to exist, you will die begging. If you know why you're here, noise becomes weather. It can soak you, yes, but it cannot name you. I did not quit. Instead, I worked harder. Maybe out of defiance, maybe out of hunger, maybe because once you survive humiliation, discipline becomes easier. The director expanded one of my scenes after reviewing dailies. Then he expanded another. Elena was no longer a fragile side character passing through the story. She was becoming one of its emotional centers. Apparently, the camera had captured something in my performance that the script had only hinted at before. Vulnerability with control. Fear with intelligence. Grace that looked earned rather than decorative. The more I heard that, the stranger my life felt. The thing I had feared would reduce me was becoming the very thing people respected me for. And if you have ever hidden part of yourself for years, you know how destabilizing praise can be when it lands on the exact place you learned to protect with shame. Of course, growth attracts resistance. Not everyone on the production loved the shift. Adrian, one of the supporting actors, had expected his character to dominate the middle episodes. When my scenes started getting stronger, his smile around me thinned. At first it was passive. Little jokes. Over-friendly questions. Bro, how long does makeup take? You getting better at the heels? Careful, you're prettier than half the cast today. Comments designed to sound harmless unless you heard the blade inside them. I ignored him. Then one evening after wrap, he cornered me near the trailers and said, "You know people are talking, right? Outside the set too. They're saying this role is all anyone will ever see now." He paused, enjoying himself. One weird role, and that's it. You become a headline, not an actor. It was meant to poison me. And part of it worked because it touched the oldest fear of all. What if being seen truly means being reduced? That night, I finally told my mother everything. Not because I was brave, because I needed one honest place to put the truth. I drove to her apartment after midnight, still exhausted, carrying groceries she had not asked for. She opened the door in her robe, saw my face, and immediately knew something had broken. We sat in the kitchen, and I told her about the role, the costume, the rehearsal, the leak, the comments, the panic, all of it. I expected questions. Instead, she listened with both hands around a teacup, as calm as if I were describing rain. When I finished, I said the part that mattered most. I said, "I don't know why it feels so big. I don't know why looking like that doesn't feel fake. I don't know what that means." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled in the saddest, kindest way and said, "Maybe it means clothes are not the most powerful part of what you're discovering. Maybe it means permission is." Then she told me something I had never known. When he was young, my father had worked in a tailoring shop and used to say fabric tells the truth about posture faster than people tell the truth about themselves. I sat there in silence, feeling like a locked door in my life had just been opened from the other side. A few days later, my brother found out through the leak and reacted exactly the way I had feared for years. Anger first, then embarrassment disguised as concern. He called me and said I was humiliating myself, humiliating the family, ruining whatever serious career I could have had. I let him finish because sometimes people reveal their limits more clearly when you do not interrupt them. Then he asked the question I think many people ask when they do not understand something but are too scared to admit that is the real problem. He said, "Is this just a role, or is there something else going on with you?" I could have lied. I could have softened it, made it safe, made it temporary. Instead, I said the truest sentence I had at the time. "I don't fully know yet, but I do know I'm done treating honesty like a threat." He hung up on me. It hurt. Not because he rejected me, because some part of me had spent years rehearsing that exact moment. The next turning point came during a live promotional event the studio almost canceled because of the leak. They wanted to reassure viewers, control the narrative, frame the show before gossip framed it for them. At the last minute, Naomi got stuck in traffic, the director was still on another set, and suddenly the publicist looked at me and said, "We need someone on stage now." I was not fully in costume, but I was in enough of it to make retreat impossible. My pulse went feral. This was not a character scene. Not hidden behind editing or lighting. This was me, in front of reporters, bloggers, cameras, fans, critics, all waiting to decide what I meant before I had even spoken. I stepped onto that stage under hot lights and a wall of attention so intense I could feel it on my skin. For one horrifying second, nobody said anything. Then a few cameras clicked. Then more. Then questions started. The first two were shallow. About preparation. About whether I found the role challenging. Then one reporter, clearly fishing for spectacle, asked if I was worried the role would confuse audiences about who I really was. The room shifted. Everyone wanted blood or brilliance. There is no neutral air in moments like that. I could have given the polished studio answer. I could have hidden behind craft. But I was tired of hiding behind things. So I said, I think audiences are smarter than fear gives them credit for. A role can challenge people without threatening them. And if seeing someone present differently for a story creates discomfort, maybe discomfort is not the enemy. Maybe it's the beginning of honesty. The room went still in a different way then. Not mocking. Listening. I kept going. I said the role had taught me that presentation is not just decoration, it is language, and language becomes powerful when we stop using it only to defend ourselves. I do not remember the rest exactly. I just remember the applause at the end did not sound polite. It sounded surprised.
Real.
By nightfall, the clip was everywhere again, but this time the comments were different. Support did not erase fear, but it gave it competition. Messages started arriving from people I had never met. Actors, stylists, quiet viewers, crossdressers telling me they had never heard anyone speak about presentation without turning it into a joke or a confession scene. Men saying they had spent years wanting to try certain clothes and never had the courage. Women saying the performance felt unexpectedly respectful. People from all over saying the same thing in different words. Thank you for not making it a punchline. I read those messages carefully because they taught me something else. What goes viral is not always scandal. Sometimes it is sincerity arriving where people expected performance. Sometimes the strongest hook in the world is simple truth delivered right before everyone assumes you will lie. Production entered its final stretch, and with it came the hardest scenes. Elena's secret is nearly exposed in the story, and everything she has built begins to tremble. Those scenes required something deeper than technique. I could no longer rely on posture and movement alone. I had to let real fear rise in the eyes, real grief in the voice, real exhaustion in the body. The director said, "Stop acting like this role is risky. Start acting like losing it is risky." That changed everything, because by then, losing the role did feel dangerous. Not for my career, though that mattered. For myself. The role had become a mirror I was not ready to lose. During one scene, where Elena removes a pair of earrings with shaking hands after a near exposure, I unexpectedly broke down between takes. Not performatively. I just couldn't reset. Naomi held my hand in silence. The director did not say cut for a while. Later he told me, that was the first day you stopped visiting the character and started living inside her stakes. Then came the sabotage I should have seen coming. Adrian had a friend in entertainment media, and an article appeared implying I had taken the role for attention, that the production was exploiting controversy, that I was privately playing into ambiguity to boost my profile. There were no direct lies, just arranged implications, which are often more poisonous because they cannot be cleanly disproved. The studio panicked. My agent panicked. Even the director got called into meetings. Suddenly my future with the show felt uncertain again, not because of the work, but because of the narrative building around it. I sat in my trailer one evening after reading the article and honestly wondered if Adrian had been right in the cruelest possible way. What if the world really would never let me be more than this? What if the role that taught me freedom also trapped me in public misunderstanding? I was still sitting there when Lena, the makeup artist, came in to remove my lashes and found me half destroyed. She listened while I spiraled. Then she said something so practical it saved me. She said, "You are thinking like headlines last forever. They don't. What lasts is skill, discipline, and whether you are brave enough to keep showing up after people simplify you." Then she started removing my makeup with that same gentle efficiency she always had and added, "Also, people who are terrified of being misread usually become unreadable. Don't do that to yourself." It hit me because I had been doing exactly that my whole life, making myself smaller, safer, harder to interpret, hoping ambiguity would protect me. But all it really protected was my fear. That night, I made a decision. I would stop treating every act of presentation like a confession that needed defense. I would let the work be the work and let my truth expand at the pace honesty required, not panic. The final 2 shooting days were chaos. One major scene had to be rewritten after a location issue forced us indoors. Another got moved to a ballroom set under brutal time pressure. Costumes were late. Props were misplaced. Everyone was tired enough to cry at staplers. And still, somehow, those last scenes held the soul of the whole project. The climax required me to enter a crowded public gathering in full presentation, knowing exposure was possible, then carry a conversation where every glance from the room felt dangerous. We rehearsed it once. The director stopped, rehearsed again, stopped again. Something was missing. Finally, he walked onto the floor, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "You're still trying to survive this scene. I need you to choose yourself in it. Even if the world rejects you, Choose yourself anyway. That is the scene, not survival.
Choice.
My chest tightened because I realized he was no longer just directing the character. When the camera rolled on the final take, something inside me settled. Not calmed. Settled. Like a blade finding its sheath. I entered the ballroom slowly, heard the silence, felt the weight of eyes, and for once did not use fear to shrink. I let it sharpen me instead. I let the dress move when it wanted to move. Let the gaze land. Let the possibility of exposure exist without bargaining with it. When the key line came, I delivered it not as Elena hiding, but as a person who had discovered there are fates worse than being seen. By the end of the scene, my hands were shaking for real. The cut came. The room stayed silent. Then the crew started clapping. Crew do not clap for every scene, no matter what people think. They clap when they know something crossed from competence into truth. I turned away, because I was suddenly afraid if anyone saw my face, I would cry hard enough to tear the wig loose. Rap Day should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt strange and tender, like saying goodbye to a version of myself who had only just learned how to breathe. Mara hugged me and said, "Now you know." Naomi kissed my cheek and said, "Don't disappear after this." The director shook my hand longer than usual and said, "Whatever comes next, do not run from what this woke up." I promised all three of them I wouldn't, though I still did not know exactly what that promise meant. I took one last look at the costume rack before leaving, ran my fingers over the wine-colored dress, and felt a ridiculous ache in my throat. It wasn't about wanting to stay in costume forever. It was about knowing I could never again pretend presentation was superficial. It changes how a person occupies space. And once you learn that deeply, you stop mocking what you used to dismiss. The premiere arrived 6 weeks later, and I almost didn't go. Not because I feared bad reviews. Those are manageable. I feared the carpet, the photos, the questions, the eyes measuring whether I would arrive in a safe black suit and reassure everyone that the role was only temporary, only theatrical, only distant from me. I stood in my apartment for nearly an hour with 2 outfits laid out on the bed. One was exactly what publicists love. Sharp, masculine, uncontroversial, expensive-looking even though I could barely afford it. The other was not a costume and not a stunt. It was simply an outfit that blended what I had learned: tailored trousers, a silk blouse under a structured coat, subtle jewelry, soft makeup, polished boots, nothing exaggerated, nothing apologetic. I stared at both like they were two futures. Then I remembered the ballroom scene. Choice, not survival. So I chose. When I stepped onto the carpet, flashbulbs burst like weather. For the first 10 seconds, I heard nothing. Then I heard everything at once. Shouts from photographers. Questions from reporters. Fans calling my name. Somewhere in the noise, a little laugh of disbelief escaped me because I realized I was still standing. I had imagined this moment so many times as collapse, scandal, humiliation, punishment. Instead, it was just bright, loud, imperfect reality. Some people stared too hard. Some whispered. Some smiled. Some looked inspired. A few clearly didn't know what to do with me. And maybe that was the point. I didn't need everyone to know what to do. I only needed to stop asking permission to stand there. Naomi saw me from halfway down the carpet and grinned so wide it almost broke my nerves into joy. Mara cried openly, which made me laugh. Even my brother, who had shown up without warning and stood near the back looking uncomfortable in his own skin, gave me the smallest nod. It wasn't resolution, but it was a beginning. The show premiered that night, and by morning everything had changed again. Reviews praised the performance. Some were clumsy about language, but the good ones understood the heart of it. They said the role had dignity. They said the presentation was studied, respectful, emotionally alive. They said there was no mockery in it, no wink to the audience, no cheap reveal. More importantly, viewers watched. They stayed. The scenes people expected to skip became the scenes they replayed. Clips spread across timelines not because people wanted to laugh, but because they wanted to talk. About performance. Identity.
Clothing. Fear.
Freedom. I started receiving invitations for interviews, panel discussions, new auditions, magazine shoots. But the messages that mattered most still came from ordinary people. One said, "I tried on a dress for the first time after watching your interview." Another said, "I finally understood why I care so much about the way fabric moves when I walk." Another said, "You made me feel less ridiculous for wanting softness." If you want to know what viral really means, it isn't just numbers. It's when one honest act gives other people language for a feeling they thought they had to hide alone. Months later, people still ask me the same question in different forms. Did the role change you, or did it reveal who you already were? I think that question sounds cleaner than real life feels. Real life is messy. Sometimes a role opens a door that was always there, but hidden by furniture. Sometimes it builds a door where there wasn't one. Sometimes it gives you courage first and understanding later. What I know is this. Before that audition, I thought crossdressing was mostly about appearance. After living through the role, I learned it is also about attention, embodiment, confidence, vulnerability, and the radical power of letting presentation become communication instead of camouflage. I learned that walking well is not about copying someone else. It is about removing panic from motion. I learned that makeup does not create identity. It reveals where your face relaxes when shame leaves the room. I learned that style is not only about what looks good. It is about what allows truth to stop hunching. And maybe the most important lesson came from the fear itself. Fear keeps telling you that if you explore honestly, you will lose everything. Your image, your safety, your audience, your place in the world. But fear is a terrible prophet. It predicts exile and forgets transformation. It promises shame and ignores relief. It says people will laugh forever and cannot imagine that some of them are only laughing because you are walking toward a freedom they have not yet dared to try. That doesn't mean the world becomes easy. It doesn't. There will always be people who reduce what they do not understand. There will always be someone like Adrian, eager to simplify complexity because it makes them feel safer in their own narrow script. But there will also be people like Mara, Naomi, Lena, Daniel, my mother, people who recognize truth even before you fully know how to name it yourself. And sometimes those people arrive exactly when your fear is trying to become your identity. If I could speak to the version of me from the night before the audition, the guy staring at his phone in a dark apartment, pretending money was the only reason he said yes, I would tell him this. I would say, you are about to step into a role you think might ruin you, and instead it is going to teach you how much of your life has been spent performing safety. You are going to learn that elegance is not fragility, softness is not weakness, and presentation is not deception. You are going to discover that the mirror is only cruel when you approach it like a courtroom. Come to it like a conversation, and everything changes. You are going to be mocked by strangers and steadied by allies. You are going to lose some certainty and gain something better. And one day you will realize the role you never expected did not simply ask you to dress differently. It asked you to live less dishonestly. So yes, I accepted a role I never expected. But that is not the part people remember. The part they remember is what happened after I stopped treating it like a costume and started treating it like a language. The first careful step in heels. The first unflinching look in the mirror. The first public question answered without apology. The first moment I understood that confidence is not the absence of fear. It is fear losing the right to choreograph your body. By the time the world saw the finished story, I was already living a different one. Not a perfect one. Not a neatly labeled one. Just a truer one. And if you are watching this while hiding some small, shimmering part of yourself behind humor or delay, or maybe someday, let me tell you what no one told me soon enough. The thing you are afraid will make you impossible may be the very thing that finally makes you visible to yourself. And once that happens, once you know what it feels like to stand in your own presence without asking permission, there is no going all the way back. There is only the next choice, and the next, and the next, until one day you look up and realize you are no longer surviving your reflection. You are becoming it.